All right, so looks like we're good to go there. So, Alan, I would like it if you could talk a little bit about your path to becoming involved in progressive politics and what inspired you to run for this seat specifically this year.
Well, thank you so much for having me at your meeting tonight. The thing is, in 2018, I ran for the United States House of Representatives. It was a race that was last minute because of the death of the Democratic nominee. It was for District 17, which was the largest congressional district in the state of Florida and the most red. And so there was a special election 30 days before the general election. And so I won the special election with 52% of the vote against 3 other contenders. And then that left 28 days to campaign against Congressman Greg Steube, who at the time was a 3-term state senator. And so without my name actually on the ballot, our campaign worked very hard for 28 days, going into some of the places where they hadn't seen a congressional candidate in probably 20 years. And so we did a lot of door-to-door. We did a lot of events. We went to a lot of churches, different organizations, and we got a chance to hear what people were in need of. And it really inspired me in a way. And so in 28 days, we were able to get 117,000 votes in the state's largest congressional district and the most red district. And what that did was it let our team know that if we worked hard enough, if we held enough town halls, if we listened very well to what the people are saying, then we could make a great deal of impact. And so that was kind of a basis for why I believe that I could win the United States Senate. Because when I look around my district, the state, and even the country, I know that, there are a lot of people that simply do not have what they need from their representatives or their senators. And I believe that with my gift of helping people and what I've learned in my life, as well as through my degree in political science, I believe that I have what it takes to write policies that will directly impact the lives of people here in Florida and around the country. And so, what this race for me is about is, one, making sure that people have a voice on the issues that matter to them. That means raising awareness on the issues that are not being talked about. It also means that we amplify all of the issues in a way where people can begin to understand how policy directly impacts their life. As a political scientist, I have found that most people simply do not feel policy unless it's bad policy, and most people don't know exactly how policies impact their world. And so one of the reasons we've been able to bring so many people over to our campaign is because we spend the most time educating the public through town halls. I hold the most town halls of any candidate, probably even in the country. But we hold town halls because what that does is it gives me a better understanding of the issues that exist. And what I've learned is that each county, and there's 67, but each county has a different themed issue. There's no 2 counties that are alike when it comes to the general issue that plagues that county. But the other thing having town halls do is it gives the people a better opportunity to hear me and understand what I'm about. I believe that a leopard does not change its spots. Whatever a person was doing before they decided to run for office is usually what they're going to be doing when they get in office. And we have a lot of people that are running for office for personal gain. We have people that have been in Congress for years with no accomplishments for the average person. They have a lot of accomplishments for themselves, but no real accomplishments for the people. And so our campaign has been about improving the quality of life for everyone. And I'll definitely take any questions that you have and get more in depth with some of the policies that you might have questions around.
Yeah, so let's start off talking about a big policy. Could you talk about your support for Medicare for All, and could you elaborate a bit on your strategy for ultimately getting it passed in the Senate?
Thank you so much. So I do support Medicare for All. I believe that one of the reasons we have not been able to get a universal health care policy passed in the United States Senate or in the United States Congress is because it usually falls along the two main arteries of how we bring revenue into the system and how we pay for policies. A lot of progressives want to be able to tax the wealthy in order to pay for Medicare for All. Well, the problem with that is that those who are in Congress are more than likely wealthy and they don't want to be taxed, so they're not going to support that. A lot of people would like to have it, but they feel that they need to cut existing programs in order to pay for something new like Medicare for All. What I've learned and studied in political science was how to put together policy and be able to pay for it where you don't get into the arguments with the Republicans or the Democrats in order to bring policy forward. So I have created several ways actually on how we could pay for something like universal healthcare, Medicare for All. And basically what we have to do is we have to create a sustainable new revenue generator to be able to pay for it. If we can pay for it without raising taxes on individuals, and if we can pay for it without cutting existing programs, I don't foresee anybody on any side of the aisle saying no to it, unless it's because they're being paid off by the insurance companies. And so one of the things that I would want to be able to do in order to pay for it is to be able to tax the sale of our privacy data by tech giants like Facebook, Google, and Instagram, all of these companies that gather information and then sell it to companies for the purpose of being able to target us with our own information, that is going untaxed. We could tax that and get some benefit for it. Another thing that we could do is we could legalize cannabis across the country, decriminalize that, and generate $135 billion in the process and use revenues from that to help pay for Medicare. We could do a lot of things when it comes to developing new public-private partnerships between private industry and government to generate new revenue to be able to pay for that. All of these things that I'm talking about are not being presented as proposals in the United States Congress. We could simply balance our trade deficit and start doing more business with countries that have certain commodities that we could trade on our international platforms to generate new revenue. And none of these things will get too much argument from either side of the equation, and policy can move forward and the people can stop being stuck in the balance with these arguments that we see all the time on these progressive issues.
Right. Got some interesting ideas there. I'll have to say, I've never heard anybody talk about taxing the data sale from tech giants. That's a really interesting idea. So does anybody have a follow-up on healthcare before we move on? Charlene?
What is the reception amongst our white rural areas to the idea of Medicare for All that you've seen in your town halls?
It's mixed, but the purpose of the town halls is to educate. So when people hear Medicare for All, the first thing they think is Bernie Sanders, they think socialism. And so it has to do with understanding branding or rebranding and how to get what we need without running into those arguments. So if you notice, I use universal health care and Medicare for All interchangeably. If I'm talking to certain people from rural America or rural parts of Florida who only see Medicare for All as some socialist program, then I educate them to understand that there are ways to pay for such a program where it doesn't mean taxing individuals, because that is a turnoff. It is an immediate turnoff for people who don't understand that our government should be in the business about improving the quality of life for everyone, starting with healthcare. And then the other thing is simply just educating them to know that out of the 33 developed nations with a system like that, we're the only ones falling behind without it. And I let them understand, like, you know, you might like your insurance company, but do you think that it is necessary that you pay all the money that you pay every month for your private insurance company when literally the government can create a system where you eliminate that cost? And I say, when it comes to premiums, deductibles, co-pays, imagine what you could do with that money, especially at a time when inflation is at an all-time high. I asked them, what can you do with an extra $495 a month? You probably could make some investments. You could save a little bit more, maybe take a trip. And once you start putting policy in a way where it becomes very real, we have not had any problems with pulling people over to our side. And so, you know, being able to get 117,000 votes without my name on the ballot, we won over a lot of Republicans, a lot of independents, simply by engaging in conversation. And so I know that we are losing in the state, we're losing in this country, because a lot of Democrats simply don't want to target or talk to independents and Republicans, primarily because they know that they're going to be talking about those Fox News speaking points. I personally don't want to hear it either, but I understand that there is a great deal of power in listening to people, even if you don't agree, because what it does is it opens a doorway to be heard. And I believe that once they start hearing me talk about policy, then there is no way they can combat what I'm telling them, because there's a difference between having a great deal of in-depth knowledge about a subject matter versus going off of speaking points. And the majority of people who disagree, they don't really have enough. I'll give you an example. Whenever the Affordable Care Act was implemented into Congress, but hadn't actually become law, I was dealing with a Republican, and she was telling me, she said, I hate the Obamacare because it has made my insurance go through the roof, but it hadn't actually taken place yet. This was like November, it was going to take place in January. I said to her, I said, do you think that it's possibly insurance company greed rather than Obamacare? And she said, no, it's that Obamacare. I said, well, what would you rather have? Would you rather have Obamacare, or would you rather have the Affordable Care Act? She said, I'd rather have the Affordable Care Act. I said, are you sure? You don't think Obamacare is better than the Affordable Care Act? She was like, no, I think I'd rather have the Affordable Care Act. And I said, well, what if I told you that the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare are the same things? One was just the Republicans' way of demonizing the other. And I said, what if I also told you that it hasn't actually become law yet? It becomes law in January. We're here in November. And so the speaking points around the issue it basically prejudiced her perception of the reality. And that's what we have to deal with. The Republicans are very strong when it comes to branding. And we have to really understand messaging and how to rebrand our message. So when you hear me talk about improving the quality of life for everyone, that is what we do. That is what progressives are always looking to do, is to improve the quality of life for everyone. Whereas Republicans are only looking to improve the quality of life for some, usually people that are in their social economic background or people that are in their party. And good policy has to always be about improving everyone's quality of life. And so we educate people on that. You know, as a political scientist, I am aware that the average Floridian only has a 9th grade level understanding of political science or civics. So we have to re-educate people across the board, because the better educated they are, the more they will vote for progressive leaders who will be able to get policies passed. If we don't educate the people, they're going to continue voting for name recognition, and they're going to continue voting for people who say they're going to do a certain thing without knowledge on how to do it or the heart to actually get it done.
So let's talk about another one of the big issues where Republicans and Democrats are kind of living in different realities, and that's the climate. What's your position on comprehensive climate legislation like the Green New Deal? And what's your vision for mitigating the environmental and economic impact of climate change in Florida, where we're particularly vulnerable?
Well, first of all, let me just say I support the Green New Deal. We have to have comprehensive environmental policies, but we also have to get out of, and let me just say this, I also support For the People Act for the simple fact that we have to get money out of politics. One of the reasons we're having such a hard time getting our environment safe and clean is because the entities that are doing the most polluting are also doing the most contributing to political campaigns. So for example, here in Florida, we have Big Sugar, we have Mosaic Mine Company. They are literally pouring millions of dollars into these campaigns. So as a progressive, I do not take corporate PAC money, because if you're going to be a regulator, and that's basically what the United States Senate or the United States House of Representatives, what they are the ones who are supposed to regulate these industries. But you can't regulate someone when you're taking their money. So we have entities that I want to definitely slap with fines and hold them to a higher standard of regulation so that we can get our environment stronger. But it's gonna really take other legislation like the For the People Act so that we can get money out of politics, because I think we have to start there. When you see that climate change is real, and you also see that senators and congressional members are not taking it as serious, it's probably because they're being paid off by the entities, like, for example, and I'll just say it, like two of the senators that we have in the United States Senate who are generating so much money through their families because of fossil fuels. You know, they're not the only ones, but they're the ones who they keep coming up a lot. Again, when the people become educated to how they are playing these games with the people's lives and their livelihoods, then the people can begin to vote these individuals out. But there has to be a political revolution of information. People have to wake up to what's going on. And so that is another reason why we spend the most time educating, spend the most time in town halls. And I know it's a tall order, but it's also why, you know, as someone running for the United States Senate against people like Val Demings and Marco Rubio, it's also why we're able to reach 10 million people every 28 days, because we are the most engaging campaign. We are the campaign that is educating the most, and we're reaching that many people without spending a single dime in ads. It's because people are learning, and when people can learn something about how government or policy will directly, positively, or adversely impact their lives, they become stimulated to the point where they want to get involved. And we have gotten thousands of individuals to volunteer their time for our campaign, literally from every single state. And they see the writing on the wall, and that is, we are going to change the conversation in the state, and we're going to change the conversation in this country, one person at a time.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I really love the systemic perspective that you take on it in terms of, you know, just really talking about how it's hard to expect anything different from politicians who are being funded by these industries. And that applies from here in Manatee County with Mosaic right up to the federal level. Let's change gears just a little bit. The average Floridian's wages are buying less and less these days, particularly in the housing market. Do you support an increase in the federal minimum wage? And how would you address the national issue of housing prices?
I do support a minimum wage increase. I support what I call a thriving wage. I would like to see people get $25 an hour. But I also would like to see people get universal basic income. We have seen where this pandemic has rendered millions of people out of work. It has taken thousands of businesses out of commission, which employs people. And we have seen millions of people lose loved ones. So on top of the stress of not being able to work, not being able to have their businesses, they've also had to deal with loss. I believe that if we had a universal basic income, we would have less stress in this country. We would have more people being able to afford housing. And I just read a report not too long ago where Florida has 3 metropolitan cities out of the top 10 metropolitan cities with the highest rates of rent increase. And so Florida is constantly increasing its amount of rent. I think that we need to have some type of rent control at the national level. I believe that we need to have universal basic income so that people can at least be able to have some money towards living arrangements. But I also believe that if we had universal health care, more families wouldn't have to be wasting their money on premiums and deductibles, and they could put that money towards living. And so those are three areas that I believe that I can make the most impact, and it will have a great deal of positive impact in the housing arena, as well as just everyday life. So that's universal basic income, universal health care, and rent control. We need to get these rent prices under control because it's skyrocketing across the entire state.
Mm-hmm. So I actually want to talk to you a little bit about those 2 senators you alluded to earlier, right? We all know who we're talking about. We don't even have to say their names, right? Back in January, they derailed the voting rights bills by rejecting any sort of change to the filibuster rules that would have required a talking filibuster. Considering the difficulty of advancing the Democratic agenda in the Senate and now the 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court, do you think that the time has come to change the filibuster in the Senate so the Democratic majority could govern with a simple majority, or could codify something like Roe versus Wade?
Yes, I believe we need to just get rid of the filibuster. If you think about it from this perspective, the filibuster is really a game. And we really don't have time for games when people's lives are hanging in the balance. It's really a shame. I think we also should expand the courts, right? The last time I looked, and I could be wrong about this, but the last time I looked, I believe that the Supreme Court was only seeing about maybe 246 cases a year, I believe. We need to expand the courts so that we can see more cases, but we also need to make sure that we are getting rid of those silly games like the filibuster. We simply do not have the time, and this is why town halls are so important. I actually had a town hall on this issue. Every Friday, I have what is known as Fridays for Florida, and we have virtual discussions on these issues. But the filibuster is one of those things that we talked about, and it hasn't been around forever, and it's probably really unconstitutional. It is a tool that people use, but it does not have any benefit for the people. It is something that congressional members use to just basically keep from having like lively debate and really policy is not being able to go forward. So we need to get rid of it. But until we have enough people who really understand it, voting for people who would be those kind of people who would vote it out, it's just going to be something that we're going to continue to have. So we have to look at other ways to get legislation passed. We have to look at very creative ways, and we have to really know how to progressively push policy forward. As I said when I first started talking, if policies are going to get us into arguments between the 2 parties, then we're never going to get any policy passed. Every piece of policy has to be written in such a way where it is funded through new, sustainable revenue generators, because every piece of policy is attached to funding. And so that funding has to be looked at in such a way where we don't get into those arguments. We can't allow Republicans to just not support it simply because of party lines. We have to be able to generate new ideas, and we can't get new ideas with more of the same. We can't have the same politicians that we've had for 5 to 30 years thinking that they're going to do something different. It simply just does not work. We have to start putting in progressive candidates with new ideas, with fresh policy perspectives, and just really people that can think outside of the box. And at the end of the day, that's what progressive policy is. It's just out of the box policy that will move the country forward and make direct impact in the lives of everyone, positive impact.
Yeah. So let's talk about maybe a couple of those out of the box policies, because we could go down the list, for hours talking about all of the dozens of issues that are really relevant to a US Senate campaign. But I'm curious, outside of the big, tentpole issues that we've already discussed, what legislative goals would be most important to you personally as a US Senator that maybe we haven't thought to ask about?
Well, in 1963, President Kennedy signed the Equal Pay Act, which made it possible for women to be paid equal wages for the same or similar work. That was in 1963. And then in 1965, under the Civil Rights Act, Title VII, there were provisions to strengthen the 1963 Equal Pay Act. But the problem is that neither one of them have enforcement, like strong enforcement capabilities. And there are millions of women, by whatever means they have found out, that on their jobs, they are still being paid less than men. And so, and it's even worse for women of color. They get paid even less than Caucasian women. But the thing that I want to be able to do is I want to put together an independent commission to investigate every employer in the United States to determine if there is a violation in the 1963 Equal Pay Act. And if there are violations, I want to see those employers fined and be able to pay back pay for every woman that has had to suffer by not being able to get paid what they were meant to be paid. Dr. King said, if you start off a race behind, if you want to win that race, one or two things are going to happen. Either the person ahead of you is going to have to slow down, or you're going to have to run faster. But if you don't change course, you will forever be behind. If we don't change the policies in this country and create the enforcement mechanisms to force employers to pay equal wages for equal work, or as the law in 1963, equal or similar work, then women will always be behind, and that means families will always be behind. We have to put everybody on an equal playing field, and that means looking at policies and how we can fix certain things to give people the chance to succeed. It is really sad, because my mother was one of those women who were raising 7 children on less. You can't get ahead in life if you are literally trying to take care of your family with less resources. And so we need to fix that. Another thing that is near and dear to me, and it's also what I call the sleeping giant in our country, is the issue of disabilities. In Florida, I think there's maybe close to 4 million individual adults living with a disability, and they are getting disability benefits, and it's not a lot. But there are millions more who are being denied benefits, those who have been deemed disabled by a medical physician, and they are not getting benefits. They're being denied sometimes up to 8 years. And the thing is that this is not a partisan issue. You can be a Democrat, Independent, or Republican and get in a car accident and become disabled and and be forced to depend on the same benefits as everyone who's currently on it. And the problem with it is that there is not enough financial resources in place to help those individuals who simply cannot work when the bills come due each and every month. And what it does is, for those who can't afford to live and for those who are being denied, it causes a great deal of stress. People go into depression, and now we're dealing with mental health related issues. And so we have to fix this issue. And just to show you how big it is, in this country, there are at least 61 million adults living with a disability. And these are disabilities that are cognitive disabilities, physical disabilities, you name it. There are disabilities that that people are dealing with. And the thing is that for every one person that has a disability, there's at least a family member or a caretaker that's helping that individual. That means that we can safely say that there is at least 120 million people in this country that are directly or indirectly impacted by the disabilities issue. And so we have seen where the Republicans, as soon as they want to fund some program that they want to fund, Social Security and disabilities are the two top programs where they try to pull resources from. So we have to make sure that Social Security is intact, and we have to make sure that disabilities is not only intact, but we need to be able to increase the funding for disability so that people who are recipients can get a little bit more, and for those who are being denied because of lack of resources can stop being denied year after year.
Right, that's such a thoughtful response, and it really has such a massive material impact on people's lives and such a range of people. I've heard it said before that, those of us who are lucky enough to make it to old age, we're all just temporarily not disabled, that eventually at some point in everyone's life, we're going to have to rely on these kinds of resources. And yeah, it really is such an important thing. And it's great to hear the depth of the thought that you've given to it. Does anybody else have any questions on domestic policy before we move on?
Let me just say this too, while you all are thinking. These are two issues, and there's others that I think about and I have policy proposals for, but these are some of the issues, and I call these progressive issues because we can move our country forward on these issues if we can win on them. And I believe that we can, because these are not really partisan issues. Yeah. But this is what makes me a true progressive, because we don't see centrists talking about these issues, and they should. We don't see Republicans talking about this, and we really don't see too many moderate Democrats talking about it. In fact, I don't really see anybody talking about it. Yeah. But that's why I'm running, so that I can raise awareness around these issues. And so, I think if you look at almost any candidate's website, you will not see the things that I've talked about here tonight. And it's really a shame.
Yeah, because that is such a critical issue. I want to go ahead and kick it over to Charlene for a little bit for a couple of questions on foreign policy and military spending.
Hi, Ellen. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the very thoughtful responses that you've given so far. I would like to get a couple positions from you on foreign policy and military spending. First one being on Israel and Palestine, and where you stand on funding things like the Iron Dome and providing more aid to Israelis in that we've been doing ridiculously for a very long time.
Yeah, I think we need to do more peace talks, bilateral talks between Palestine and Israel. I don't think that we should be spending as much money as we're spending from a defense standpoint. And I'll tell you why. When you add up all of the countries in the world with a military, the United States spend more money in defense than every country in the world with the military combined. If we were to cut our defense spending in half, we would still be spending more money than every country in the world with the military combined. The problem with defense spending is that the majority of it is wasteful spending. We overspend as a government already. America is the world's largest buyer. It is the world's largest spender, and our military is no different. The other thing is, when it comes to military spending, is that the majority of our spending is actually going towards for-profit defense contracting firms. And these firms are made up of individuals, probably less than 1,000 individuals, that are actually getting the lion's share of our defense budget. So if we're spending money in Israel, it's not necessarily going to Israel, it's actually going to the entities that make weaponry. The companies like Lockheed Martin or Raytheon, Blackhawk, Blackwater, some of these Israeli for-profit companies. People are getting paid, and politicians are getting kickbacks. The other thing is, and I just want to show a parallel, one of the reasons why you see Republicans not so out to fund education or healthcare or things like that is because usually those types of entities are carried out through 501c3 nonprofit organizations. And whereas prisons and jails, most of the policies are carried out through for-profit entities. Now, for-profit entities normally have stockholders, and a lot of people don't realize this, but there are a lot of congressional members that own stock in these for-profit defense contracting firms and private prisons. So when you see these war hawks, or when you see members of Congress voting for and pushing for there to be an increase in military spending, these are the same individuals who are getting dividends off of the stock that they own in the entities that policy is being carried out through. So that's the reason that I really don't support the type of military spending that we see. And I don't even want to say military, I just say defense, because defense is a little different than military, because the military, and I'm talking about the soldiers and the veterans, they're getting the very least. Oftentimes, our soldiers and their families and veterans are struggling when it comes to paying their bills. They're struggling when it comes to getting the health care that they need, especially when I've seen veterans struggle to get from where they live to a veteran hospital that could be 3 hours away, and they have to wait so long. I think if we were to cut our defense spending in half, we could use that excess money to pay for something like universal health care, or be able to strengthen our medical record system within our VA so that people or veterans can go from hospital to hospital without having to go outside a network and be dealing with those issues. When it comes to what's going on in the Ukraine, I believe that we should be helping people in the Ukraine, because we're dealing with a humanitarian crisis. We're dealing with war crime issues, and we're dealing with an adversarial government that has the ability to connect with other governments around the world to cripple our economy. So we have to be proactive in a sense. But yeah, in general, we need to really look at how we're spending money in our defense system in America. It's out of control.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. A couple other things. What is your position on BDS, and what is your position on the general sanctions that we're putting on countries like Afghanistan, Venezuela, the 60-year sanctions on Cuba, and now on Russia, seeing that a lot of these sanctions are hitting these individuals in the country that personally, as opposed to just punishing their leadership, and basically are there for regime change?
Yeah, I think it's necessary, but I think it's going to have indirect fallout on us. So, for example, we get we were getting about 7% of our oil from Russia, primarily because although we have reserves, America is one of the largest consumers of oil. Oil is literally in 70% of everything that we can see or experience. But when we put those sanctions on countries like Russia to stop getting our oil from them, we also got 30 other nations to do the same thing. And what's going to happen is, because of that, because of what I feel is necessary, I also feel that those same countries are going to depend on the same places where we get our oil from. And it is going to cause demand to increase because the supply will be less. And we will have to pay for it eventually. If you notice, the oil prices, they fluctuate, they go up and down. But over time, they continue to go up. When I was a kid, gas prices were like 67 cents. Now it fluctuates around $4, but I know that it's going to continue to go up because with the 30 other nations that we're partnered with now also dependent upon the same resources that we have, or that we are getting our resources from, we're going to feel it. But it's also the reason why it hits back to domestic policy, which is we have to start really taking serious on how we generate energy in this country. We have to really get to clean energy. We have to do solar, we have to do water, we have to do wind, because, and I'll tell you this, the oil world knows that oil is not a sustainable resource. Even in Saudi Arabia, they have what is known as the 2030 vision, which means by 2030, they are going to move away from oil as their main source of GDP or their main source of revenue for their country. And so we should have already had plans like this. I support the infrastructure bill because it does put resources and funding towards clean, sustainable energy, but we really should be doing a whole lot more, which would also have positive impact on the climate change issue. I think that it is going to be necessary to have these sanctions in place, but it's also something that's very volatile, and we really don't know all of the different ways that America can be adversely impacted, but we're going to have to start building from within in order to deal with whatever these foreign countries are going to come at us with. Countries like China and Venezuela and all of these different countries who we get a ton of our oil and other products and resources from.
Do you support sanctions that deny people food and medicine, like the one we imposed on Venezuela and Iraq and now Afghanistan?
No, I think sanctions like that is a little tough. Some may find it necessary, but at the end of the day, I'm a humanitarian. I believe that we should make sure that people can at least eat and that they can at least get medications. But when it comes to other things, other frivolous things or things that are not necessary, then I support that. But I don't support, cutting off food. It sounds like something that you would see on Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Let's see. Military spending. Where are you on? You've been talking. These are all related items. Are you familiar with modern monetary theory, and as a means of how the federal government funds itself and how the actual flow of cash is generated in the country, in any sovereign nation that has their own currency?
Somewhat.
I was just wondering because that, all that stuff is kind of tied together with, the domestic program and how to pay for things. And Professor Stephanie Kelton, she was one of Bernie Sanders' economic advisors. She had a book on that called The Deficit Myth. I'd recommend it to you to read it so that you can have more of the language, that you might need in order to convince who will hopefully be your peers, perhaps.
Hold on for just 1 second. I'll be right back.
So about 8:17, so we'll move on to the campaign stuff and then we'll wrap after that. There we go, yeah. David Ferry, you know, is a friend of ours and has participated in a few of our events, and he did a whole talk on that book. So, you know, we're quite familiar with David Ferry.
Yeah, you know, it's very interesting. Years ago, I was a sports and entertainment agent, and in the film world, film production companies generally do not go to film distributors. So they usually go through an agent. And so there was a company that came to me wanting me to be their agent for a film that was called The Establishment. And The Establishment was going to be headed up by lead actor Alec Baldwin. And it was along the lines of, you know, monetary theory, but more so on the international banking system that controls the United States government. So it goes into a great deal of detail to talk about how certain bankers leveraged certain economies to cripple the United States economy for the purpose of forcing a economic downturn in America, which ultimately collapsed the globe, the Great Depression. And then what happened was Roosevelt, who was president at the time, wanted to stimulate the economy. So he went to these bankers to borrow a sum of money to stimulate the economy, but we didn't have any credit. So what he did was he collateralized 80% of the land in America and then created two systems. One was the Social Security system, and the other one was property taxes. So prior to 1933, those two systems didn't exist. So when people went out and staked a claim to land, they outright owned it. Now no one owns land in America, because if you pay off your home and don't pay your taxes, they will put your house up on an auction block for pennies on the dollar for whoever can come and pay the property taxes. And so what that movie was basically, it was like a documentary, what they were trying to bring to the forefront of everyone's mind was that in theory, the government pays for everything through tax money, but in reality, it's all borrowed money from the bank. And whenever we need money 10 years from now, the money that we borrow is not enough to sustain the new population, because the new population is much larger. This is how we get the debt ceiling. And it goes into a great deal of detail to talk about all of the different systems or currency systems that we have been through in this country. Most people think we only have one, but we've gone through the greenbacks, the silver certificates, the Fed notes, the debt currency system, and now we're moving into something like digital currency. But under the debt currency system, it simply means that whenever we need to pay for things in this country, we borrow it. And it's a credit system that converts to debt the minute you buy it, or the minute you access it. So as soon as you access it, it converts to debt, and then you have to pay it back with taxes. And so no matter what you come up with to try and balance the budget, as long as you owe the bank, you can never get from up under it, because the minute you need more money, you have to go back to the bank all over again. And so that's been the system in America since 1933. And so the reason I come up with these new sustainable revenue generators is because it's the same pool of money that we have to go back to the Feds each and every time we need to increase the debt ceiling or the credit card limit. And it's something that I should write a book about, because I think if more people understood it from that perspective, I think they'll have a better understanding of why I put together policies the way that I do.
Let's go ahead and move on to our last topic of the night, which is the campaign. You've got some stiff challengers ahead, both in the primary and in the general. What's your plan to take on Val Demings? And then what's your plan to take on Marco Rubio?
Well, the thing is that as someone who ran in the largest congressional district in Florida and the most red and the most rural district, I kind of have a base of voters that would support me that she does not have. And the other thing is people are really tired of Marco Rubio and they want a better alternative. Again, what we have been doing is evidence enough to suggest that if we're able to, and for the longest time on so many different social media platforms, we were leading on so many different social media platforms in terms of supporters, in terms of analytics, in terms of just outreach. And it all had to do with our ability to reach people where they are. If you look at the last federal candidate to run in Florida and win, it was Obama in 2008 and in 2012. There hasn't been another federal candidate to win Florida. And if you remember, the only reason he won it was not because he got all the Democratic votes. It was because he was able to win independents and some Republicans. That is what it's going to take to defeat Marco Rubio. And I don't believe that Val Demings is going to get progressive voters. I don't believe she's going to get Black Lives Matter voters with her police background. I don't believe she's going to get Antifa voters. I don't believe she's going to get independent voters. I don't believe she's going to get Republicans. Some people feel as if because of her law enforcement background that was going to somehow get Republicans to vote. But even with law enforcement as her background, we saw where Marco Rubio got 55 sheriff endorsements in a state that only has 67 counties. We see in the polls where she is constantly moving further and further away from a victory. We did one poll, I think I beat Rubio by like 98%, but she hasn't beat him in any poll yet. When it comes to Rubio, you just simply need to be able to win over his base. And I know that his base is tired of him because he hasn't done anything for them. He does not engage them and he does not return phone calls or emails or anything. And so we've put out a strategy to defeat Marco Rubio. And it's one of the reasons why so many people around the country have joined in. It's one of the reasons why so many people down in Miami have supported our campaign. A lot of people don't know this, but one of the people that do support our campaign is the CEO of Univision. She told me that she was one of the people that helped to support his campaign for the United States Senate. She helped him. She gave him access to her audience, which is millions of Hispanic voters down in Miami through Univision. And she, out of all the candidates, I am the only one this time that she has given that platform to. And it has helped us tremendously. Everybody wants the same thing at the end of the day. It's a better quality of life. And that's what we focus our attention on. We focus our attention on making sure that people are being heard. And that's the thing that is really stimulating voters. If you think about it from this perspective, most voters don't vote in political elections because they feel as if politicians are going to do whatever it is that they want to do, and they feel like they're going to be left out of the process. I learned early on that if you engage voters in the way that I do, it is very stimulating and they want to be involved. And that's why our numbers are able to compete with Val Demings, who has been in Congress for 5 years. I've never held political office. And out of the 10 congressional candidates or senatorial candidates that's running for this office, I am able to compete with her in terms of reach, in terms of connection. And it's because I pay attention to the people, I listen to them, and I give them the platform to be heard, and I learn from that. Each and every time I'm in a platform with voters, I'm listening and I'm learning and I'm putting together policies. But the other thing is, and I say this all the time, I need to be the senator because I've been doing Marco Rubio's job, running for this office for the last year and 5 months. I'm the longest running candidate in this race. And for the last year and 5 months, I use my platform to actually help people. So when someone says that they have a leaky roof, I use my platform to find financial resources to get that roof fixed. If someone is having a hard time paying for drug treatment programs, we use our platform to help them pay for drug treatment programs. We've helped the most people with the EIDL grants for small businesses. We've helped the most people that were homeless. We've helped people keep from getting evicted out of their homes. We've helped with hot water heaters, tents for homeless people. I mean, we've just been helping. I spend more time helping than I spend asking people for money. People are really fed up with all of those midnight emails asking for deadline donations. What they want is, what are you going to do to help me improve the quality of my life? And what I tell them is, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to find out what you need right now. And me and my team, we're going to get on it and see if we can help you right now. And that is stimulating people across the country, because we're not just helping Floridians, we're helping people across the country. And that is very hard to compete with, especially for someone with someone who does not have the office, but literally doing the job that senators and congressional members should be doing with the weight of the government behind them.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. So I think that's a great place for us to leave off tonight. I want to thank you so much for joining us and for being so generous with your time and expansive with your answers. You know, it's one thing to go to a policy page on a website and to read, you know, the copy there, but it's another thing to hear a candidate talk about this kind of stuff with clarity and with passion. And so it's just been a really illuminating discussion, and we just really appreciate so much you taking the time to join us tonight. I will let you know that we have talked to a couple of the other candidates for this primary, and I think there's one more that we're trying to talk to, but we're trying to reach an endorsement decision somewhere in the next 6 weeks here so that we can start mobilizing our connections around Manatee to start supporting the campaign of whoever we decide to endorse. And we'll be in touch. You've made a really strong case tonight, and it's just been a pleasure to have you. So on behalf of the whole group, I want to thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed myself with you all tonight.
It's great. So